This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Leigh Howard, and on behalf of Global Victoria, in partnership with Asialink Business and the Australia Indonesia Business Council, I'm very pleased to have you join us for this discussion on the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement and what it means for Victorian business. Before going any further, I would like to pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of Victoria and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. Ladies and gentlemen, today we'll hear from a distinguished panel of speakers who will discuss what IA-CEPA means for Victorian business. We'll endeavour to go into the details of this free trade agreement, relevant to businesses and exporters, and we'll allow time for a Q&A session at the conclusion of this presentation. Please do note that today's session is being recorded. It is my very great pleasure to acknowledge our speakers for today. Ibu Speaker Alphanya Tutuhatunewa, Consul-General of the Republic of Indonesia, based in Melbourne. Mr. Michael Dean, Regional Trade Agreements Division at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Mr. Garry Embleton, Operations Director, Ausfine Foods and Deputy Chair of the Australia Indonesia Business Council. And our moderator for today's session is Mr. Mukund Narayanamurti, CEO of Asialink Business. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over the reins to Mukund, I'd like to provide some opening remarks and set the scene on aspects of IA-CEPA as they pertain to Victoria. As most of you will know, Global Victoria is our state's gateway to global economies and communities. And as a state, we are uniquely placed to support Victorian exporters and Victorian businesses in their international aspirations. We have a network of international Victorian government trade and investment offices throughout the world. And in Southeast Asia, we're represented by 3 offices in Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, where I am based, and Singapore, with a 4th office, and Victoria's 23rd overall, due to open in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam later this year. This commitment to international engagement by the Victorian State Government is reflective of the growing importance of Southeast Asia to Victoria and Victorian businesses. One of our main functions at Global Victoria is essentially to help exporters to access opportunities, and we've invested heavily in developing our network of contacts and our capability to provide this service in key markets. This is something that is particularly true of Indonesia. Victoria's trade relationship with Indonesia is significant. It's our 8th largest trading partner overall, and the more than $770 million worth of merchandise exports come out of Victoria into Indonesia every year. And yet, for those of us who are based in the region, we see the potential of exports to grow even further, and the potential yet to be realised, which is why when an FTA such as IA-CEPA comes along, it represents a golden opportunity to both cement what we've achieved so far, but also to build for the future. And I hope that that's something that we can talk about today. I'd like very briefly to touch on 4 key highlights that have come out of my reading of IA-CEPA. No doubt our other speakers, particularly Michael, may go into more detail on some of these, but it's important that we provide a level of granularity for Victorian businesses when looking at FTAs. One would be food. Over the years, our teams in both Victoria and in our Jakarta office have worked closely with a large number of Victorian exporters and their counterparts in market to recognise opportunities, build connections and facilitate export relationships. So for that reason, it's very pleasing to see that IA-CEPA delivers real outcomes in terms of food across a range of categories, notably red meat, such as frozen beef, dairy, such as milk powder, feed cereals and citrus fruits, to name a few. I think what's also worth noting is that the improvements aren't just in tariff rates, but in expanded market access via improvements in import quotas and licensing arrangements. The second highlight I'd like to draw upon is in the area of education. And for us, education is a key part of our relationship with Indonesia, most notably in the area of vocational education. And IA-CEPA provides what I would describe as very due recognition of vocational education in its relationship with Australia. So the agreement refers to TVET, which we know as VET often in Australia, and TVET is covered in detail, and it talks about the opportunity for Victorian vocational education providers, which by and large have been our TAFEs, to provide Australian qualifications, to provide Indonesian qualifications, and also non-award courses, just to name a few. The other key point of relevance is that Australian investors can now take majority ownership of vocational training companies, and this is a benefit of IA-CEPA that we see extend to other service sectors and investments in those types of companies. The third area that I'd like to highlight under IA-CEPA as a takeaway for me was a section on digital, and in the agreement it's referred to electronic commerce, and I think this is a component that every business, big and small, should be pleased to see in the agreement. Amongst numerous improvements, we see the adoption, the allowance for submission of trade documents electronically. We see the allowance for electronic signatures to be recognised. We see the removal of previous requirements for locating servers in Indonesia, and also the requirement to share source code. So pulling back from those previous restrictions is good news for Victorian businesses. And the rest of that section on electronic commerce also talks about strengthening IP and data protection. And any way you cut it, this should be regarded as progress, and something that every business should take heart from. Finally, the key highlight for me in IA-CEPA was a section on economic cooperation. And this might sound a little bit obscure, but it basically outlines the commitment and frameworks for further improvement of market access beyond what's in the agreement today. So while your typical FTA will talk about improvements in tariffs and market access for goods and services, and look, that's certainly true of IA-CEPA, what it also does is create this framework, this theme of economic development that runs through the entire agreement. And for me, that's what distinguishes IA-CEPA from many other FTAs. And look, this is this makes perfect sense, if you like, in the context of different stages of development of our two economies, and would appear to be what essentially is a sensible pathway for future market access, opening up, and the ability to engage with Indonesia as time moves forward. So look, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me. Thank you once again for joining us for this webinar, and we appreciate your participation today. I'd now like to hand over to Mukund, CEO of Asialink Business, to moderate the rest of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh, for that excellent overview and introduction to many of the benefits in IA-CEPA. As Leigh's highlighted, my name is Mukund Narayanamurti, and I am the CEO of Asialink Business. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined today's session. We have a terrific group of speakers, and I will introduce them very shortly. But just to recap, the focus of today's session, as Leigh's touched on, is first and foremost to highlight the opportunities with Indonesia for Victorian businesses, which our Consul-General from Indonesia, based here in Melbourne, will speak about very shortly. Second, to speak about the benefits in IA-CEPA, which Leigh has very eloquently highlighted across food, education, digital, and economic cooperation, which Michael Dean will build on in his presentation. And then three, to share a case study that of Ausfine Foods, which our speaker, Garry Embleton, who I will introduce as well, will speak to, in addition to his experience with Indonesia more broadly through his role with the Australia Indonesia Business Council. And then finally, we will have a Q&A session. So I invite all of you to please share your questions through the chat function so that I can actually share them with our great speakers, and Leigh will also be joining that panel discussion. So with that, I would like to invite our very first speaker for today, the Consul-General of the Republic of Indonesia in Melbourne, Ibu Spica Alphanya Tutuhatunewa. Ibu Spica is currently a Consul-General and Head of Mission at the Consulate-General of the Republic of Indonesia in Melbourne, accredited to Victoria and Tasmania. Her 2 previous postings were in Vienna and in Washington, D.C. Ibu Spica is a diplomat for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with the Republic of Indonesia and has extensive experience in the areas of education and training and in transnational organized crimes. Ibu Spica holds a bachelor's degree in agriculture and a master's degree in political and social sciences. Ibu Spica will now present the opportunities for Victorian businesses with Indonesia. Ibu Spica, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to thank first and foremost for the Asialink and as well as the Australia Indonesia Business Council and Global Victoria for the opportunity to speak this on this very event. Everybody knows that IA-CEPA, or maybe some of you know, IA-CEPA was negotiated for almost a decade and just entered into force in 5th of July 2020. And now is the time to implement, or we can really seek the opportunity to work together to implement this long negotiated agreement. Second of all, I would like to, in this time and era, I would like to highlight the results of several survey about Indonesia. That Indonesia is a country that really very optimistic in its view, be it in the daily life of the view of the daily life, or in terms of economy. McKinsey and Company, Kantar Indonesia Research Firm, and also Nielsen Research Institution also mentioned about the optimistic view of Indonesians. Indonesians optimistic is also give way to the facts that with the more than 260 million people and member of G20, the only Southeast Asia country in the G20, Indonesia has a productive age of 60% of the population, and that accounts for 181 million at least people that are productive. Indonesia is the 4th largest economy by 2045, according to several research firms. And this is the trajectory based on the last 5 years economic development. Ease of doing business in Indonesia is in progress. And based on the World Bank Review 2020 review, Indonesia ease of doing business is they put Indonesia at the rank of 73 out of 190 economies. So for foreign investors or foreign business, Indonesia has lots of opportunity and potential to work together with us. So with that, I would also say that's the situation of Indonesia and the loss of opportunity, potential for collaboration with Australia. How about Indonesia and Victoria? Now, Indonesia and Victoria have a long relationship as well, and we are optimistic as well for the collaboration between Indonesia and Victoria in the years to come. Not only in terms of the cultural relationship, because we have lots of Indonesian international students here in Victoria, but also based on the economic relationship between Indonesia and Victoria. In education, Victoria is the home for about 7,000 Indonesian students in higher education as well as in trade. And we have also several Indonesian students at the Victorian schools, and we are very happy with that situation. In terms of business, we have good collaboration from the consular perspective. We have very strong collaboration with the AIBC to promote Indonesian and Victoria business or economic relationship. Now let me put you to the slides. How about the situation between Indonesia and Victoria nowadays? The trade volume that we will have. Now this is the trade volume of Indonesia and Victoria in Australian dollars. Victoria export to Indonesia is about 66% out of the total trade volume, while Indonesian export to Victoria is about 34% of the whole trade volume. And this volume is accounted for several sectors. Now, this is the top 6 exports products from Victoria to Indonesia. Of course, big chunk of it, 39%, almost 40% is from the frozen meat. About 20% is from milk and cream. Also fresh or dried grapes, fruits, food preparation, flour, starch, malt extracts, and also dairy products account for about 9%, and polymer as well as cheese and curd for 5%. So this is the total of or top exports from Victoria to Indonesia, and this is growing by the year. So this is lots of opportunities for Australian Victorian businesses. How about the imports from Indonesia or export from Indonesia to Victoria? And this is the data from the third quarter in 2019. As a consulate perspective, we believe in partnership, we believe in collaboration and cooperation. So it is not a good trade if we only one side of the equation and not the other one. So we have to have a balance or to have a cooperation between the two, the trades between the two. And this is from Indonesia, the top 6 import products coming to Victoria. The big ones, more than 50% for cigarettes containing tobacco. 19% of it from petroleum oils. There are some wood, monitors, projectors, as well as footwear. And this is the top import products. We are not only export from Indonesia to Victoria, but we would like to see more about the collaboration between the two. Now, this is the opportunities for Victorian business coming to collaboration or economic cooperation between Victoria and Indonesia. We identify there are 5 big sectors that we already have the collaboration, but we will look forward to see more based or because of we have the IA-CEPA. Education certainly is one of important sector for business between Indonesia and Victoria. Not only because Victoria is the education state, but because with more than 180 million productive age young Indonesians that have potentials to grow, become the business or the government officials, education is very important both to Indonesia and Victoria. Indonesian government also put top priority for develop the human capital of Indonesia. And in this regard, Victorian education system can have a big advantage in relation with Indonesia. In energy, also lots of opportunity. Health sector is also very important, especially in this time and era. Not only in terms of education for Indonesian health officials or for the Indonesian medical staffs, but also in terms of developing infrastructure in hospitals or even nursing home, how to manage the nursing home, learn from Australian or Victorian experiences and then export that to Indonesia. In agribusiness, certainly, this is very important for us. And the last one is in transportation and telecommunication. And this, in all of the sectors, I would like to also emphasize the importance of the digital ecosystem or digital space in this regard. With almost 200 million young Indonesians, digital is also, they are also very savvy in digital space. Now, I would also mention about maybe some already know about the partnership. We put highly importance to the word partnership in IA-CEPA. And in this partnership word, in Indonesia, economic powerhouse is one term that we believe we can expand more or even work upon Indonesia and Victoria as an economic powerhouse. In economic powerhouse, we see that the potential between the two countries is also enough to bring us both in the global scale, that we can work together and then export our products to the third country or even fourth country or to another global counterparts or markets. Now, I'm sorry. Let me get back. Last thing that I would like to mention here, that when you are trying to build a business with Indonesia or to work together with Indonesia, being a joint forces and then work to another international market, some will ask how to build a business in Indonesia, or how can we find a counterpart or business partner in Indonesia. First and foremost, I would encourage you to know your partner in Indonesia, or if you cannot find a partner or you would like to have a partner in Indonesia, you certainly can contact us at the Consulate-General. If you have the partner, build the trust and network in Indonesia is very important before you going forward and then expand the market in Indonesia. So we're very happy to work with you. In not only in those areas that I have also already mentioned, but suppose that you have another interest in another areas of cooperation that you think we can work with you for that. Looking forward really to be the partner here in Victoria. Thank you very much again for the opportunity and looking forward to have a discussion later on with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, for sharing with us that sense of optimism about the Indonesian economy, sharing with us the profile to date of exports between Indonesia and Victoria, and for also sharing with us the top opportunities in education, in energy, in agribusiness, the health sector, and in transportation and telecommunications. And your point on the digital economy is incredibly important, and I think it's definitely an area in which there is a need to share more information with Victorian business, but also businesses more broadly in Australia, just given vibrant Indonesian digital economy is, and hopefully we can pick up on that particular theme amongst others during the Q&A discussion. Thank you again, Ibu Spica. It now gives me great pleasure to invite our next speaker, Michael Dean, who is currently working in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's Regional Trade Agreement Division on free trade agreement advocacy, to share with us his views on IA-CEPA in terms of the benefits offered by IA-CEPA and the ways in which we can go about accessing those benefits. Michael has previously worked on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, Pacific Trade Agreement negotiations, and other Pacific trade issues. He has also had postings in Washington and London. Welcome, Michael.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can, Michael.
Sorry, I just had a few technical difficulties at my end. Thank you, Mukund, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. Very happy to talk about the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. I just want to start briefly by saying, acknowledging these are tough times for businesses, for people, particularly if you're in Melbourne, Victoria, but also Indonesia. So I hope people can stay healthy and safe. The federal government, for its part, is working hard to reduce the negative impact on COVID-19, as well as, of course, the Victorian government and other governments. For information relating to trade-related assistance that the federal government has, I encourage you to visit the DFAT website or the Austrade website, or a more general website, which you can access via business.gov.au, business.gov.au. So this is an aside, just again, hope everyone can stay safe and healthy. Turning back to today's presentation, I'll be providing a bit of an overview of the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is also known as IA-CEPA for short, and also providing some hopefully practical tips along the way. Starting with a few scene-setting slides, this slide lays out the straightforward definition for a free trade agreement. It's an international treaty between two or more economies or two or more countries that reduces or eliminates certain barriers to trade and investment. Not all barriers to trade and investment, I have to emphasize, are addressed in free trade agreements. Some measures, such as quarantine measures for plants and animal health, human health related trade measures, or product standards or food standards, are not part of free trade agreements. And sometimes our partners have sectors which they won't liberalise for any country, so as part of any trade negotiation. So it's just to be aware of that for a free trade agreement, what it is and also what it isn't. This slide also emphasises that a little bit more, in the sense of, yes, free trade agreements certainly help businesses, but from a business perspective, from an import-export perspective, there are a number of factors to consider. I know there'll be a number of exporters on the line, so this may be straightforward for you, but just to emphasise that, you know, you have to think about the ease of doing business, and that's been mentioned, what the cultural requirements are, the food labelling requirements are if you're exporting, know your customer, know your market, know your export market. So there are a number of factors to consider from an export perspective, but free trade agreements are definitely part of the puzzle, definitely help provide a boost to either importing or exporting or investing, if you're looking from a business perspective. But of course, there are a number of other factors to consider from purely a business perspective. This slide, as it's being introduced, shows you our 14 existing free trade agreements, starting with our bilateral agreements. And you can see the last three that are appearing now are ones that have entered into force this year: Hong Kong, Peru, and as of the 5th of July this year, the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership came into force. We also have two regional agreements, one of which involves Australia and Indonesia, the ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which is represented there down the bottom as ANSFTA. And of course, we have the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which involves Australia and several other countries, which entered into force in December of 2018. All of these agreements are reasonably comprehensive. They all offer goods and services export opportunities for businesses. The order in which the bilateral agreements appeared on your screen was pretty much the order in which they entered into force. New Zealand did in the early 1980s, all the way to the Indonesia agreement, as I've mentioned, which entered into force in about a month ago now. To give you an idea of how important this is as a group, you can sense that by looking at the extent to which our total two-way trade with the world is covered by free trade agreements. Around 70% of our total two-way trade is with these free trade agreements. There are partners that are represented on the screen. And as the government negotiates more free trade agreements, as we are planning to do with countries like EU, UK, also another negotiation known as a Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, another big regional agreement, these sets of agreements will become increasingly important for businesses for Australia in the future. Looking a little bit more closely at the bilateral relationship with Indonesia, for several decades the bilateral relationship's been characterised by strong cooperation, close partnership, as well as very close people-to-people links. And that's been true ever since Indonesia became a country in the late 1940s, when Australia provided very strong support for Indonesia's independence, and is true up until today. And we're becoming ever more closer, both on a bilateral basis, but also in our viewpoints and cooperation on regional and multilateral issues. So from a bilateral relationship point of view, Australia and Indonesia are growing ever closer on a number of fronts. Indonesia, if you look at it from a trade perspective, is Australia's 13th most important trading partner. From an investment point of view, Indonesia ranks 27th as a country destination for Australian foreign investment. And looking at it from the reverse, Indonesia is the 38th source of foreign investment on a country-by-country basis into Australia. So I think you can look at those numbers, and some of our speakers have mentioned already that relationship could be stronger, should be stronger, especially when you consider that Indonesia is one of Australia's nearest neighbours. It's the fourth most populous nation in the world, with around 264 million people. It has a G20-sized economy, an expanding middle class, and certainly the IA-CEPA will help realise a lot of potential that's there in the bilateral trade relationship, increase the partnership that's been mentioned, and IA-CEPA is a genuine partnership which offers new export and import opportunities and investment opportunities both ways for businesses in Indonesia and also in Australia. Looking a little bit more at the detail of some of the outcomes that are important on a goods front, as I've mentioned, I think this is a comprehensive agreement that covers a range of goods and services as well as investment outcomes. And you can see here that over 99% of our goods exported to Indonesia by value will enter into Indonesia either duty-free, that's tariff-free, or under improved preferential arrangements. And by that I mean increased quotas, for instance, or other arrangements which will help liberalise trade between our two countries. Some of the sectors or exporters that will benefit include those getting tariff-free access or tariff cuts on frozen beef, sugar, vegetables, sheep meat is another example, dairy products, and also citrus products, just to name a few of the goods exports which will benefit from improved arrangements under IA-CEPA. And also, as been mentioned before, there are other benefits, not just tariff reductions with regard to IA-CEPA and goods exports from Australia to Indonesia. Exports such as frozen beef, sheep meat, feed grains, citrus, and potatoes, and exports of carrots will benefit from Indonesia issuing permits, import permits, automatically and without seasonality. So that's been a bit of an issue in the past, but hopefully that's been overcome now with the IA-CEPA including those commitments. And as a comprehensive agreement, Indonesia also very much covers services and investment sectors. There'll be a range of improved export opportunities for our service suppliers into Indonesia, and some of the sectors that have been mentioned already include work training and vocational training, mining and services, health and aged care services, tourism services, professional services. These are all just examples of service suppliers that will benefit from improved opportunities for exports under IA-CEPA. And also, as has been mentioned before, there are benefits to Australian investors. Under IA-CEPA, Australian investors will benefit from guaranteed levels of allowable Australian ownership in a range of Indonesian sectors, including with regard to hospitals, And I have to mention that also IA-CEPA is more than just your basic free trade agreement covering goods, services and investment. There are a couple of special elements, and one of them has been mentioned already, and that's the economic cooperation provisions under the agreement, which will help maximise the benefits of the agreement realised by both countries or businesses in both countries. That involves basically a jointly government-to-government funded work program, which will help provide technical assistance and capacity building activities that will hopefully lead to increased trade and investment. Another special aspect of the IA-CEPA, which I would agree with our previous speaker, is very much a partnership, and that is in the area of skills development. There are a number of provisions in the agreement itself, plus some accompanying memorandum of understandings or MOUs, which have been negotiated at the same time as the treaty itself, which will help build skills development in both countries, help bring businesses closer together, help improve people-to-people links. And a couple of examples there are highlighted on this slide. Australian vocational suppliers can own up to now 67% of investments in the Indonesian vocational education and training sector. There's an accompanying MOU covering skills development, which will allow certain businesses from each country to send people with tertiary level skills to work for up to 6 months in the other country. Under the negotiated outcomes, there's also an increase in the work and holiday visas for Indonesians wanting to visit Australia. And there's also an MOU relating to skills-based development through workplace training, which will allow for a pilot scheme of up to 200 Indonesians per year to receive work-based skills training in Australia in certain sectors. Another important aspect, and it's been highlighted already, relates to the digital trade elements of IA-CEPA. And we know that, certainly digital trade before COVID-19 was becoming increasingly important as a way of doing business. I think everyone accepts that COVID-19 will lead to an acceleration of the acceptance of digital trade as a means of commerce. And certainly a number of our free trade agreements have digital trade provisions which should help facilitate trade. As examples, our bilateral agreements with Singapore and Hong Kong, and the CPTPP agreement I mentioned before, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, involves digital trade-related commitments. And also, IA-CEPA has digital trade-related commitments. For the first time between Australia and Indonesia, there's a guarantee of the free flow of data or information across borders for service suppliers and investors as part of business activities. Also, Australia and Indonesia have also guaranteed they will not introduce new laws or regulations that require data to be sourced locally within one country or the other. And Indonesian and Australian software suppliers will not be required to hand over valuable source code as a condition for the import, sale, or distribution or use of software. So these are all digital trade commitments within IA-CEPA, which should help facilitate trade between our two countries and provide new business opportunities, hopefully. There are also commitments relating to protection of consumer rights and combating spam within the digital trade space of IA-CEPA. Now, moving on to some general advice I have for particularly goods exporters or importers, and this applies with regard to IA-CEPA, but also our other free trade agreements as well. It's important, if you've not been working with our free trade agreements, to understand what you need to do to get the reduced tariff or the lower tariff available under a free trade agreement, such as the one we have now with Indonesia. Just because your product is exported to an FTA partner country doesn't mean automatically you get the tariff reduction. That applies even if your product is labelled Australian or it has the Australian made logo. That's not enough to get the tariff reduction under a free trade agreement. You need to go through a number of steps to prove your product is originating from, say, Australia in the case of exports from Australia to Indonesia, or from looking from the Indonesian perspective, prove your product is Indonesian according to the terms of IA-CEPA when you're exporting from Indonesia to Australia to get the benefits of the lower tariffs available to you. And this is because we only want businesses in our respective countries to benefit from this free trade agreement. We don't want countries or businesses from, say, South America exporting a product into Australia, labelling as Australian, and then exporting to Indonesia, getting the benefits. We want genuine business products from Australia and Indonesia to be benefiting from these free trade agreements. And the main requirements relate to rules of origin and documentation. And I'm just going to show you a slide now that goes into the steps you need to think about as exporters. And if you've already done a bit of exporting under our free trade agreements, you'll be very familiar with this, but there are a number of steps here. First, to identify, you can see under the number 1 there, how your product is classified or how it is treated under the HS code, which is an international code for trading used around the world. Secondly, determine how your product will be treated, what sort of tariff reduction will get under the free trade agreement, in this case IA-CEPA. Thirdly, you need to decide if the product meets the rules of origin. Now, the rules of origin are simply criteria specified in the treaty which ensures that your product is considered originating from an FTA partner or from Australia to be determined that it can get the tariff reduction. So it's simply a criteria which helps determine the product is Australian or is Indonesian as determined in the treaty. Fourthly, you've got to complete the origin documentation. Now, these documents are often known as a certificate of origin or as a declaration of origin. And again, the rules are specified in the treaty for that. And fifth and finally, you've got to submit that claim, that documentation to the Importing Customs Authority of the country in question. The good news is it is a little bit complicated, I grant you, but if you go through these steps a number of times with the same product in the same market, it certainly becomes a lot easier. Some people use customs brokers, freight forwarders. DFAT produces a guide, which I'll go through in a little more detail later, to help businesses benefit from these free trade agreement tariff reductions, to go through the steps you need to go through that I've highlighted on this slide. So I'll be highlighting where you can get that guide in some later slides. And just to go through stage 4, that in a little more detail on my next slide, under IA-CEPA, there are 2 kinds of origin documentation for Australian exporters. And one of them is called a certificate of origin, and these must be issued by an authorised issuing body. If you're looking at it from the Australian perspective, into Indonesia, if you're looking to export to Indonesia, Australia's issuing bodies are the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry or the state-based affiliates, the Australian Industry Group or AusDocs International, and these can be issued, as I mentioned on the screen here, to an exporter, manufacturer, producer or an authorised representative. For imports into Australia, Indonesia's issuing body for certificates of origin under IA-CEPA is the Ministry of Trade. And under IA-CEPA, there's a second form of origin documentation that exporters from Australia to Indonesia can get instead of a certificate of origin. Australian registered exporters may alternatively choose a self-completed declaration of origin to support their claim for preferential tariff treatment under IA-CEPA, or those getting those lower tariffs. So there are 2 options for Australian exporters: a certificate of origin and a declaration of origin. One is certified by an issuing body, and the other one is a self-declaration for Australian exporters. As I say, I'll be highlighting exactly where you can get a lot more information relating to the guide in a later slide. One thing I want to mention, particularly, hopefully a lot of you are aware of this website already, is the Free Trade Agreement portal, or the FTA portal. This is a portal website supported by DFAT. It provides really easy to access information about importing and exporting using our free trade agreements. I hope a lot of people are using this website already, but I encourage you, and you can see the web address there, ftaportal.dfat.gov.aul. ftaportal.dfat.gov.aul on the website on the screen there. This is a really user-friendly website. You can easily access for your product, export or import, what the tariff might be under IA-CEPA, and learn about the origin documentation that I've talked about, which is necessary to get the tariff reductions. And it also helps services exporters as well. So this is a really user-friendly website, and I encourage you to go and just play with it. It's free. There's no problems about just putting your product name, indicating you're either exporting or importing, and then choosing the FTA partner in question. In this case, we're talking about Indonesia. Hit the entry button, and it should come up some options which are relevant to your products, and you can choose the particular ones which are specifically relevant to your product, and that will help you know about what the tariff reductions are, know about the documentation requirements are, So I highly recommend this site. And a couple of other tips for you in terms of further information, if you want further information. I put up the fta.gov.au URL there. That will get you to all of DFAT's free trade agreement web pages. So there's a wealth of information you can get by fta.gov.au, including on our negotiations that are going on, that I've highlighted initially in my presentation, but also with regard to IA-CEPA. And I've also highlighted 3 further websites there, which should hopefully be useful to people. The first one is DFAT's Using IA-CEPA to Do Business. This is where you'll find the business guide, and you can see on this slide a representation of the front page of that slide, the front page of that guide, I should say. So there's a lot of useful links on the Using IA-CEPA to Do Business link that I mentioned there. If you're looking at it from an import perspective, the second reference there, the second URL mentioned there should be helpful. That's the Australian Border Force's website. And thirdly, I'd just like to mention that the ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, which includes Indonesia, Australia, is currently going through an upgrade process. The parties to the agreement have agreed to look at negotiating improved outcomes under this agreement over time. So if you want to find out about the answer for the upgrade that's going on, please help yourself to that website there. The first round of upgrade negotiations were due to occur in June of this year, but were postponed due to COVID-19 and may be rescheduled for later in 2020. So that's pretty much my presentation. I'd be very happy to answer questions during the question and answer session. Hopefully you found it useful and you can access these slides later, particularly the website references on this page here and the FTA portal. But I'd also like to say that we'll be putting on a video just at the end of my presentation, which shows you how easy the portal is to use, and it is only very short. So hopefully you get a sense of how easy the portal is to use by looking at the video that Sarah is about to put on, and you can access the portal at any time and see for yourselves how easy it is to use. So thanks very much. I hand back to our organisers. Thank you.
The FTA portal and user-friendly website helping Australian businesses to export and import using free trade agreements. The FTA portal will help you get information you need to export and import, including how to benefit from lower tariffs and guidance on selling services overseas using free trade agreements. Just follow these easy steps to use the FTA portal and benefit from Australia's free trade agreements. Go to the website ftaportal.dfat.gov.au. Enter a good or service using keywords or a code. Select Export or Import. Select a free trade agreement partner and then click Search. When more than one free trade agreement is available, the The FTA portal helps identify which agreement offers greater benefits to exporters or importers. The FTA portal also has other useful features, such as a guide for first-time exporters and importers, designed to make free trade agreements more accessible. The FTA portal can help you unlock the significant opportunities created by Australia's network of free trade agreements.
Thanks, Michael, for your really comprehensive presentation, for really sharing with all of us the history of FTAs, how far we've come, the benefits that have been offered to us through our FTA architecture in Australia, the broad factors to consider in addition to FTAs, which is really important to remember so that we use FTAs in context. And then third, the benefits under IA-CEPA from a goods and services perspective, the skills package within, and also from a digital trade perspective. The really practical points you made, in particular around claiming the lower tariffs through certification documentation, and who we can work with domestically to secure that documentation, was all really helpful, as was the final video on using the FTA portal, which is a really useful portal to help exporters. And we'll touch on that again as part of the discussion. So thank you, Michael. Looking forward to the discussion with you. I'd now like to invite our final speaker, Garry Embleton, who is Operations Director for Ausfine Foods International and President Director of PT Ausfine Foods Indonesia. Garry has been with Ausfine Foods for 10 years and has 3 decades of experience working in international trading. Ausfine Foods established PT Ausfine Foods Indonesia in 2014, which is uniquely placed as a 100% Australian-owned company with business approval and license to import dairy and other food ingredients to Indonesia. Garry has been a member of the Australia Indonesia Business Council for 5 years and currently serves as Deputy Chair of AIBC in Victoria. Please join me in welcoming Garry, who will speak about the case study of Ausfine Foods and also share with us his broader views in the current environment in respect of market diversification and where Indonesia fits in. Thank you, Garry.
Thanks for the introduction, Mukund, and the opportunity to speak today, and also really following on from what Michael's great presentation there. I think the overarching view that I'd like to bring to this is that free trade agreements of this nature, as presented here, governments really provide the framework and smooth the pathway, but it's up to the businesses to get out there and take advantage of the opportunities that a free trade agreement brings to life and create business from it. So that's what we at Ausfine Foods seek to do, but also what the Australia Indonesia Business Council seek to assist interested parties with. So that's the overarching view that we'll bring to this. Now, in terms of Ausfine Foods, it's been a company operating in Melbourne for 30 years. Back in around 2014, we decided to take the leap of establishing an office in Jakarta. It was a very difficult and slow process, and most things when it comes to registering businesses, especially as a foreign entity, can be that, but it's worth the perseverance. We now have a business employing 6 local staff in Indonesia. As mentioned by Mukund in the introduction, we're a fully licensed importer in Indonesia for dairy products, and as a 100% Australian-owned company, I can assure you that was a long and slow process, but one that we're now very comfortable with having allocated the time and resources to do with the advent of the IA-CEPA. Whilst the Australian dairy export to Indonesia is actually quite a mature market, Australian dairy has been exported to Indonesia for well over 50 years. We really identified there was some growth opportunities for us to get more involved and establish an office in Indonesia 5 or 6 years ago. And that was partly because of the relative difficulty that a lot of exporters found in going into Indonesia, and the share of market, or the share of export that dairy products in particular were getting from Australia had probably reduced in Indonesia, and the relative interest of exporters, as with the advent or the increase in China, was such that we felt Indonesia was being somewhat left behind in terms of the interest that Australian exporters were allocating to it. So, and as the slides presented by Ibu's speaker earlier showed, meat and dairy from Victoria to Indonesia is very, very important and vital exports, but we actually feel there's a lot of room for growth in that space, and especially under the IA-CEPA. By volume, and even though those slides by Ibu's speakers show the importance to Victoria, by volume, Australia is actually not a large exporter of dairy products to Australia by world standards. Relative to the USA and the EU, we're actually quite small by the volume, but the products that are sent there do tend to be relatively higher value, and in particular what we put into it with our trading partners, supply partners, is how can we supply higher value products in there? How can we allow producers and end users in Indonesia to collaborate on technical needs to really fine tune and provide premium pricing? So whilst the average value of the volume of Australian dairy products going into Indonesia is relatively lower, the average value is higher than those of the US and the EU supply, and the duty advantages that will flow from IA-CEPA will only increase that return into Australian businesses, or provide a shared opportunity to Indonesian users as well for them to benefit from lower tariffs. The other side of things that I think we should all be considering at the moment is we're in a world where nationalism and closing borders seems to be the trend coming our way. So we know that Indonesia has been having trade tensions with the EU for some period of time, but likewise now we're seeing that that China and tensions in China are with Australia, US, various countries are increasing. So from our point of view at Ausfine, that vindicates our decision of a few years ago to, while everyone was putting a lot of eggs into the China basket, we felt that the future was actually to diversify more and help other companies to diversify with their export targets. And certainly, as many experts would say, the tensions with China are more likely to get a little worse before they get better. The size, the growth trajectory of Indonesia is such that we think the opportunities there are fantastic over the coming years, and heartily encourage exporters to turn their attention back to our nearest neighbour on that. Many of the duty advantages under the IA-CEPA are actually already available to Australia through the ANZFTA agreement, which was noted earlier in the presentations. However, the IA-CEPA we think will give added advantages exclusively to Australia, and that's by giving Australia, Indonesia opportunities to address issues bilaterally without being reliant on a larger group of discussion and negotiation, without being reliant on New Zealand also responding to any issues or complaints that come forward. So really the opportunity to be nimble between the Australia and Indonesian relationship is likely to be improved as a result of this agreement. And also we do take note of the ancillary benefits flowing, not just tariff reduction, but certainly looking forward to seeing the automatic issuance of import permits, or the automatic renewal of import permits coming into place, which will be a wonderful administrative improvement if that comes to being. So that's a wonderful thing. along with the mandated regular dialogue under the agreement, which will provide opportunities and in particular look to reducing other technical barriers to trade as it goes along. That's the view of my business at Ausfine Foods, but also the Australia Indonesia Business Council, which is getting behind this agreement, the work of government and the work of private businesses in taking advantage of this. We do thank both the Australian and Indonesian governments for the work that has gone into it, and we do understand these things are many years in the making often, and now it's over to businesses like Ausfine, like many of our trading partners, to use that framework, follow the pathway, and build on the wonderful relationship between Australia and Indonesia. Thank you, Mukund.
Thank you, Garry, and congratulations on your success in Indonesia. It appears that all your hard work from those initial days have paid off. And so looking very much to building on the points that you've shared and perhaps advice that you can provide other businesses looking to enter so that they can perhaps have a smoother entry into Indonesia. So we'll touch on that as part of the panel discussion. But can I please now invite Ibu Spica, Leigh Howard, and Michael Dean to join Garry and me in a Q&A discussion. We have a number of questions coming in. To make it easy for you, Michael, I'm going to recommend that all of our panel speakers leave your cameras on, so that, Michael, you don't have to switch on and off because we know you're having some technical difficulties. Hopefully that helps. We have a number of questions that are coming in, and I'll perhaps come to you, Leigh, with the first question that's come in from our audience, which is about Jakarta being a popular entry point into Indonesia and also as an attractive market. Yeah, but what other provinces do you believe, Leigh, that Victorian businesses should also look to consider as they enter and expand in Indonesia?
Thanks, Mukund, and good questions. So, look, obviously people think of Jakarta as the capital and, as the natural place to be in. Certainly a lot of companies are headquartered there, so it makes sense for companies to be there. But I'd probably tease that question out in terms of making it sector specific. So if I talk about provinces and cities in Indonesia that were relevant to us, well, in a pre-COVID world, a lot of Victoria's food and premium food was heading to Bali, with a very strong pre-COVID tourism and food service sector was a key recipient and had a very large appetite, if you like, for what Victorian exporters had to offer in terms of food. The other provinces and cities that come to mind, certainly West Java and its capital Bandung. That's a key place that we see business relationships growing. I'd call out Surabaya as certainly a physical entry point as well into Indonesia, and perhaps rounding it out, Medan is another location to look at. So, look, these correspond with the economic areas of Indonesia generally, but it's a pretty big, broad country, Indonesia. So it's not as easy as always sort of maybe a comparison of Sydney and Melbourne. It can be a fair bit of terrain to get across to have more than one physical location, if you like. But that's some of the insight I'd share with the audience. But I'd certainly bring it back to the sector. So if you're in oil and gas, it's very different to if you're a food exporter.
That's very helpful in terms of context, and taking a sectoral approach makes complete sense. Ibu Spica, is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of provinces?
Thank you, Mukund. That's a very good question, basically. And just like Leigh, as a business sector, the focus of the products, that is very important to take into consideration. But also, I would like to take into consideration the cooperation or standing collaboration between the Australian government or even Victorian government with regional government in Indonesia. Leigh already mentioned Jakarta, Bali, Bandung, Surabaya, and Medan, but I would like to also add one area or entry point, that is Makassar. Makassar in South Sulawesi, where also Victorian government has collaboration with Makassar. Not only Makassar as an entry point to the whole eastern part, central and eastern part of Indonesia, but also with Makassar, they have a very good university, very big university, Hasanuddin University, that already has a standing collaboration with Australian universities and Victorian universities. So there are already foundation there that we can enter into the other markets or sectors, not only economy, but also education, health sector as well in the area. So you covered the whole Indonesia from west to the east. Maybe that I can add into the question. Thank you, Mukund.
Thank you, Spica. That's very helpful context again. Thank you. I might bring in Michael into the discussion here to speak a little bit about ANZFTA IA-CEPA, which came up in your presentation, and also Garry referred to both agreements. What's the best way that businesses can navigate both agreements? How do they decide which one to work with and really facilitate their decision-making process?
Thanks for that question. Yes, basically ANZFTA goes on, IA-CEPA goes on as an option for business to use one or the other. And the FTA portal that I mentioned before can be very helpful in helping businesses to choose for their product what gets a better tariff reduction, if any, under the agreement. So I would encourage businesses to use the portal, put in their product either by HS code or a simple product description, and it should come up with some answers which allow a comparison between the two agreements as to which one gets a better tariff reduction, if any. It might be they both get the same tariff reduction, and in that case, you might look to what the documentation requirements are under, in terms of origin documentation are under each agreement, and decide which one's better for you. But essentially, the FTA portal is a key tool for making that sort of comparison about which agreement's better for your export or import. Thank you.
So, Michael, if I could just build on that a little bit and also bring Leigh into this discussion. The FTA portal is an incredibly valuable platform for our businesses to use to navigate, to determine how they can get the benefits from the various agreements. In addition to the portal, what other form of support can Victorian businesses looking to enter the Indonesian market actually look to receive from the federal government and also from the state government? Because I am conscious that particularly with small and medium-sized businesses, there are a number of obviously departments and agencies which can provide support, and it'd be useful to hear from both you and Leigh on the nature of support that Victorian businesses can avail.
Sure. I'll let Leigh jump in first.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. So, look, I think there's certainly a wealth of information from our federal colleagues in terms of what's online, and Michael's provided a really, really comprehensive overview of where to go when you're looking for that information. From a Victorian perspective, I'd bring more the people focus into play. So in terms of our colleagues in Global Victoria in Melbourne and across the state, so I'd encourage companies that are interested in exporting or exporting to specific markets to reference that website. Very quickly get in touch with one of our representatives from a relevant sector team. So we operate sector teams across food and fibre, international education, professional services, digital, and you like. So they will be able to engage with an exporter or an aspirational exporter, if you like, to assess their readiness to enter a market like Indonesia. And then they'd be connecting with our relevant team in market for each country. So in this case, we have quite a large team in Jakarta, and our trade managers there, if you like, will be able to match exporters to relevant opportunities. So whether that's buyers or retailers or importers, if you like, depending on what the circumstances are. So it really brings a hands-on approach and a human approach to connecting businesses to their counterparts in market.
And from my perspective, this is Michael Dean here. There's a range of different agencies which can help businesses grow to the point of export and also export once they're ready to do so. And I think Leigh's kind of already alluded to a couple of them that I was going to mention. Trade Start, if you Google Trade Start, you can certainly get a lot of individual help at the Victorian level. It's a network of specialist advisors located pretty much across Australia to help businesses. It's co-funded at the federal and state level. But Google Trade Start, that's one option. Of course, Austrade is there to help businesses connect with the world, including Indonesia, and they have the Export Market Development Grant Scheme, which can be very helpful to businesses looking to get into markets. I've mentioned the portal, of course. The DFAT website or the DFAT work undertaken also goes into the area of non-tariff barriers. So if you experience what you think is an unfair, unjustified trade restriction in another country, you can report it via the NTB Gateway. If you do Google NTB Gateway, and that can be looked at by a range of departments across government at the federal level and seeing what can be done about that particular issue that you might raise. Of course, you can get funding perhaps from Export Finance Australia if you're having trouble getting funding from commercial options. Another program that I'll mention is the Australian Trusted Trader program, which helps very much get product across borders. So I'd encourage you to, if you're looking to get into a situation where you're exporting regularly, you might have fresh food products particularly, the Australian Trusted Trader program can be very helpful to you. And finally, at the federal level, for the Department of Agriculture, they have a manual of importing country requirements, which is known as MICOR for short. I'll mention that again, the manual of importing country requirements. This helps you understand what exporters need to do to meet the import requirements with regard to food and agricultural products when they're exporting to another country. So the manual of importing country requirements website can be really helpful, particularly for food and agricultural related exporters. That's a range of help. Of course, I'll just give a plug again for the portal because that's a really helpful tool with regard to FTAs. Thanks.
Mukund, if I can just add as that, I should make a reference to what's happening in sort of the COVID reality. You know, prior to the COVID shutdowns and the restrictions on international travel, the other way that exporters would be supported is through the trade missions that Global Victoria would traditionally run to market, and those would cover a range of sectors. And you know, I think we've seen a very large cohort of Victorian exporters come on those missions, and they're a great way to access numerous opportunities. At the same time, we'll also run inbound missions, which would bring buyers into Melbourne and into regional Victoria to connect exporters and buyers in that way. Now, really, you know, we're looking now at this transition to delivering missions virtually, and that's something that's in the pipeline. In the meantime, what's happening is, to be frank with you, the phones run hot in terms of the inquiries that are coming from exporters who are looking for new markets, and to a certain extent, I think Garry touched on diversification. That's a word that's been spoken a lot. So we've got exporters that are reaching out to our trade managers in Southeast Asia and Indonesia specifically. I think Indonesia, because of IA-CEPA, but also the sheer size of Indonesia, people look at it as a market of interest. So those inquiries are coming there, but we do hope to be able to deliver more virtual trade missions as a substitute or a way to connect groups in volume in the near future.
Thanks, Leigh, and thanks, Michael. So there are a range of programs. There's the portal, mission support, and of course, as you mentioned, Leigh, your wonderful colleagues across Global Victoria, but also in Southeast Asia are available to support that business matching. So there are a range of really resources available to support Victorian businesses. I'd like to bring Spica in here because obviously the support from the Indonesian government is also incredibly important for Victorian businesses. And there's a great question in Spica that's come in from a participant who's asked whether you could comment on the 3R investment license program and whether that will be expanded and the criteria lowered to allow smaller Australian businesses looking to invest and take advantage of this particular service.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very good question. As I mentioned before in the presentations, that doing business in Indonesia is develop or improve every day. It's not perfect yet. I don't know whether we will achieve perfection, but it's improved every year or every day. For the time being, most notably is we have the National Single Window of Investment through One-Stop Service Center or One Single Submission System. And this is also is an advancement, or this is very good, because before you will have so many desks to maybe Garry will have the experience on that, but there are many desks to go through if you want to have an investment in Indonesia. Nowadays, we also with the investment agency in Indonesia, there's layers or there's criteria. If you want to invest in Indonesia, there's some of layers or criteria for the your incentive, you can say, incentive to businesses if you want to invest in Indonesia. And this 3-hour service is allocated to certain investment, which are a certain number of investment in Indonesia. So they have the incentive to do that. We don't have yet to all sectors yet, but I hope if there's interest here, we can communicate to the investment agency in Indonesia, and then they can improve even more the service to all sectors and covers all investment, despite the sectors or also the number of investment in Indonesia. Maybe that I can add, yeah?
That's very helpful, Ibu Spica, and so we can recommend to our participants to engage with both Leigh and his team and with your office in order to avail more information on that particular service. And so I might actually bring you in here, Garry, to speak a little bit about your own experience. What kind of federal and state government support did you procure at the time? And if you did not, what advice would you give? Because we have exceptional support available now that could potentially, because I want to pick up on your language, it was a long and slow process, and potentially with the quality of the state and federal government support that we have, potentially it could have been a different experience for you. Could you comment a little bit about that, please?
Probably a little bit of a loaded question from my personal point of view. As Ausfine are a well-experienced exporter, we exist for export, and every bit of business that we do crosses a border somewhere. When we engaged in the process, we did actually, I visited in Jakarta to the Austrade office and to the Victorian government office. Perhaps because we do operate somewhat independently, and to use an Australianism, we have our big boy pants on when it comes to doing business. We didn't get a lot of help, to be honest, from, in particular, probably from Austrade, and they're aware of that through subsequent conversations. So I'm not speaking out of school, but I'm comfortable that as experienced players and experienced exporting business, we always make some mistakes and learn from them. But we'd done an office in the Philippines prior, and our hands are up. We made a lot of mistakes when we opened the first office, which was in Manila. We learned a lot from those mistakes and did everything we could not to replicate them with Indonesia. And the first thing that we made a mistake of on the first one and fixed on the second one was making sure that every registration was in place before we tried to transact business. Now, that was a slow process. It was probably really a 3-year process of following a pathway, and for better or worse, we started that process right at the beginning of President Jokowi's term, and I'm a great advocate for Indonesia and the wonderful, successful democracy that it is. But there were some difficulties in terms of the bureaucracy at the time in terms of them understanding what the new president was looking for. To Spica's comment before about the improvement in processes, I absolutely see that that's the case. Whilst our business hasn't really benefited from that, and I take a point about it not being perfect, but I think in this case, perfection would be the enemy of progress, and there is a lot of progress being made in the way Indonesia is going about that, and I wholeheartedly support the efforts that they are doing there. But ultimately, it comes back to, for an exporter point of view, knowing your product, knowing what you're trying to achieve, and in our case, we had a confidence that we could do something valuable in Indonesia, valuable for our business, valuable in terms of offering Indonesian customers a point of difference on how we dealt with them, offering our suppliers in Australia and globally a different approach to the Indonesian market. So we were quite focused on saying this is what we want to achieve and we're going to go ahead and do it, regardless of government support. However, the more and more governments get on board and smooth the pathway, as I touched on earlier, it's about making the pathway as smooth as it can be. But ultimately, you have to have the right business model and the right business idea to be successful with it.
So that's very helpful context, Garry. And I think your point that as a seasoned international company, you had your ways of operating, but for many businesses that are looking to enter a market as complex as Indonesia and many of the markets in Southeast Asia more broadly, the support from both the Victorian government and from the federal government would actually be quite
absolutely vital. That absolutely, and organisations like AIBC and Michael referenced a lot of websites there. We're now part of the Trusted Trader program. I can wholeheartedly endorse the value of the Trusted Trader program. And Michael, thanks for that, Michael. I actually never knew what Michael stood for, but I know that my team reference it all the time on the access requirements. So there you go. I've learned something of what that actually references. But fantastic resources through there that at the touch of a button, make it absolutely clear what do you need to do, and that is the message for in particular emerging exporters is do your research on what do you have to do. The worst thing you can have happen is pack a container full of whatever your goods might be and send them on their way and find that it can't gain entry into the country once it gets there. So do your research on that. Tap into whether it be government resources, private resources, business groups. There's a lot of resources out there, and do your homework.
Thanks, Garry. Very helpful context, and thank you for sharing your own experiences as well so freely. There have been a couple of questions that have come in, which I'm going to bring together under the theme of the digital economy, and I'd like to really invite Leigh and also Ibu Spica to really paint a picture of the digital economy in Indonesia, the opportunities with that digital economy across, if you can firstly start by speaking a little bit about the breadth of the digital economy across ride sharing, e-commerce, travel, fintech, digital health, just to paint a picture of just how vibrant the digital economy is in Indonesia. And then second, speak a little bit about what those opportunities mean then for Victorian technology companies. Leigh, I might come to you first and then come to Ibu Spica, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I was about to say that the digital economy of Indonesia is one to watch, but I might rephrase that and say it's one to participate in. I'd be very bullish on what the digital sector in Indonesia has to offer in terms of opportunity. And look, in terms of the development of software, there are certainly, we're seeing some hotspots of that around Jakarta and Bandung in terms of incubators and those types of zones, and I think that's great. I might use my time just to talk about e-commerce in Indonesia, because I think that as a catch-all sector is also quite exciting. Indonesia's population that is dispersed over quite a wide and very interesting geographic area with the number of islands, and You know, people talk about growing urbanisation, but I still consider it a very distributed population. So we're seeing pretty much anyone who's online is using e-commerce to transact. So you've got about, I think, 55% internet penetration rate, something like that. But of that, the more interesting stat is of that, 90% of those folks are transacting online in e-commerce. You've got a large unbanked population, which are also looking at online wallets and other payment options, if you like, to engage and to conduct their financial transactions. So the e-commerce platforms in Indonesia are going strong. It's also a very, very diverse product range online. And I was on a call about 2 weeks ago with someone who intended to list new cars on Tokopedia, one of the platforms there. You'll find everything. It's not restricted to electronics and sort of normal consumer goods. You'll find a very, very wide variety of goods being sold online, from very low value items to quite high ones. So that's an area that we're looking at. Obviously, as I talked about transitioning our trade missions to digital delivery, well, if COVID means we can't bring our exporters to market physically, then we'll look to bring their products to market because we can still get those through, and therefore e-commerce represents a really growing opportunity. So look, that's some short comments there, but I'd love to do a whole webinar on the digital and e-commerce opportunity in Indonesia. I think there's a lot of legs to it.
Ibu Spica.
Thank you very much. This is interesting. The question is very also good. I have to start by saying that in Indonesia, there are several unicorns already, at least 4 unicorns. And one of that is Gojek, where you can find everything in Gojek. And if you, and in this time of pandemic, if you want to buy medicine or you cannot go out of the house, in Gojek, it serves everything. So if you now want to buy medicine, for example, you can find it in that application. And that already established several years back. So in Indonesia, this kind of platform already exists, and the ecosystem is very good in Indonesia with millennials. Certainly for the all other services, it's robust and it's very easily accessible in big cities like Jakarta or Surabaya or even Bali. But in other parts of Indonesia, even the services like sharing rides or transportation, for example, through application is already, you can find it in other parts of the Indonesia as well, far away from Jakarta. So that is the strength of Indonesian young population and also the young intellectuals behind all of these digital sectors. Now, what is about the benefit for Australian products or the collaboration between us two? In unicorns or in the platform like Tokopedia, for example, you can have Australian products now going into Indonesian markets. You don't have to go and have it in the store, but put it in the platform or e-commerce like in Indonesia, and then you can have a benefit in that areas. Other opportunities for collaboration in the digital sectors is about fintech. In Indonesia, for example, with Australian system here, in financial sectors, certainly we can collaborate or even expand the existing collaborations in the financial sectors. So with the unicorns there, in Indonesian financial sectors can learn from Australia, not only about the regulations, but how on the daily basis using that for e-commerce. There are many small businesses in Indonesia that is not bankable. They don't have account in the bank, but they have the wallet in Gojek, for example, or in Tokopedia. They don't have to have the bank account, but they can use the platform, this digital platform, to do business or commerce. So there are lots of opportunities, wide opportunities for Australian system, financial sector, for example, and work with Indonesia in the digital areas. take away. Mukund, thank you very much.
There's a lot there to cover, and we might actually separately, Leigh, post this session, share with our participants some information on the digital economy. Certainly we have quite a bit of information within Asialink Business. I know that the federal government does, as does the Victorian government, but it's a significant topic, and it's actually really important to paint a picture of the vibrant, advanced economy that Indonesia is today and the opportunity that that presents. So that might be something that we'll pick up in the post-event communication. Leigh, I am conscious of time, so I would like to use this opportunity to formally close this event. And I'd like to start very much by thanking Global Victoria for collaborating with Asialink Business. Thank you, Leigh, to you and your team, including Chris Hunter and everyone else within Global Victoria, for your sense of partnership. I'd like to thank the Australia Indonesia Business Council, whose work has become only more important, Garry, with IA-CEPA. Thank you to your colleagues nationally for the contributions you're making. Thank you to our wonderful speakers, in particular, Ibu Spica. Thank you, Ibu Spica, for making the time to present our audience, sharing your sense of optimism with us about Indonesia, which is shared by all of us here in Victoria and broader Australia. And thank you for sharing with us the opportunities that you saw across those 5 very specific sectors, which Michael Dean's presentation was really helpful with as well, in highlighting the benefits through IA-CEPA, through different areas of goods and services. And Michael, thank you for also the really practical explanation of how the benefits could be availed, and also the value of the FTA portal. We'll ensure that links to the portal are also shared in our post-event email to all participants. And Garry, congratulations to you and to Ausfine Foods on all of your success, and for serving as a great exemplar for other businesses here in Victoria, but I should say also nationally, to consider as a great case study to follow into Indonesia. Finally, thank you to all of our participants who've taken the time out of their busy schedule to be with us today. I encourage you to stay connected with Global Victoria, with the Indonesian Consulate, with AIBC, and with Asialink Business for further information on opportunities with Indonesia and how you can access them. I'd also like to request your support and participation in a survey, which will be shared with you shortly. We really value your feedback so that we can ensure that future events also meet your expectations. With that, I'd like to formally close this event. And once again, thank you to our wonderful speakers, to Global Victoria and AIBC for partnering with Asialink Business in this event. Good afternoon, everyone. All the very best.